Hello everyone and welcome to Radical Thinker, the place where we challenge Western media narratives and perspectives. Today is May 14 and we are entering day 76 of the American and Israeli war imposed on the Islamic Republic of Iran. Today's headlines are Trump's visit to China, the admission of Israel's Prime Minister's office that Benjamin Netanyahu secretly visited the UAE, and the developing Cold War between Iran and the Gulf states. First, yesterday, as I was saying, Israel's Prime Minister's office confirmed that in the midst of Operation Roar of the Lion, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu made a secret visit to the United Arab Emirates and met with the President of the United Arab Emirates, Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed. This visit led to a historic breakthrough in relations between Israel and the United Arab Emirates. According to Khan News, this is not the first visit of Netanyahu to the UAE, but it's the first time that it was made public. This didn't go too well with the Emiratis, whose Ministry of Foreign Affairs surprisingly denied Netanyahu's visit to the state. But what is very interesting to me is how Israel pushed the Emiratis under the bus. This admission of Netanyahu's visit to the United Arab Emirates has only one reason behind it, and that reason is to enhance and to increase the hostilities between the United Arab Emirates and the Islamic Republic of Iran. Israel will go anywhere and will do anything to pit the Arabs against the Islamic Republic of Iran and to put the Americans to fight against the Iranians. This is how Israelis are always playing. This is their style. Iran responded to the news of Benjamin Netanyahu's visit to the United Arab Emirates through its foreign minister, Syed Abbas Araghchi. He wrote on X, "Netanyahu has now publicly revealed what Iran's security services long ago conveyed to our leadership. Enmity with the great people of Iran is a foolish gamble, collusion with Israel in doing so unforgivable. Those colluding with Israel to sow division will be held to account." This is a clear warning and a clear message directed at the United Arab Emirates, because they are the ones collaborating and planning different nasty schemes together with the Israelis in order to weaken and to destroy Iran. As I was saying a few episodes ago, the Islamic Republic now is seeing the United Arab Emirates as an extension of Israel, not as a neighboring Arab country. This is over. I don't think we are going to see diplomacy and good and brotherly relations between Iran and the United Arab Emirates or Kuwait or Bahrain too soon. I don't think this will happen. On contrary, we are already in what I am calling a Cold War between the Islamic Republic of Iran and many of the Gulf states. Most of these Gulf states are just vassals of the Americans and of the Israelis, and they are playing along with this big plan that Netanyahu and the Americans have of destroying the Islamic Republic of Iran, either through direct war, which they failed, or through indirect special operations like creating riots, protests, or through sabotage and other types of operations. This morning, Iran also boarded and seized a vessel 38 nautical miles northeast of Fujairah, the United Arab Emirates, which is now sailing towards Iranian territorial waters. The seizure comes as the United States and China are holding a historic summit in Beijing. Besides this, according to New York Times, the current estimate is that about 10% of Iran's missile bases have been permanently disabled by US strikes in more than a month of war. The remaining 90% of missile bases and launch sites throughout the country remained either fully or partially operational and are likely too heavily fortified to be disabled with airstrikes alone. Secret new assessments say Iran has operational access to 30 out of its 43 missile sites along the Strait of Hormuz, suggesting that its military remains far stronger than what President Trump has asserted. This is what New York Times wrote yesterday. And if this is the truth, then Iran's control over the Strait of Hormuz is uncontestable, and the Americans will need to adapt to this reality. If after 1 month and a half of heavy strikes, heavy bombing, and even attempts for ground operations, Iran still has 30 operational missile sites out of a total of 33, only along the Strait of Hormuz. I'm not talking about the other underground missile cities spread all over Iran. We are just talking about what Iran still has operational along the Strait of Hormuz, which is more than enough to control the strait and to project power over the Persian Gulf and to put in big trouble all these little Arab Gulf states. Countries all over the world will need to adapt to this new reality. For example, yesterday, the Prime Minister of Japan, Sanae Takaichi, announced that one Japanese affiliated vessel successfully transited the Strait of Hormuz after various coordination efforts, including direct talks with President Pezeshkian. This for sure will not go along well with the American administration. The fact that Japan negotiated directly with Iran to have its vessels cross the Strait of Hormuz. The Americans are not going to be happy that Japan, their vassal state, decided to take measures into its own hands and negotiate directly with Iran. This will blow directly in Trump's face. The fact that Japan decided to do something without asking the permission from the Americans. And if more and more states like Japan and other vassals of the United States or European countries are going to choose this path of directly negotiating with Iran, this will only sideline the Americans. This big plan that they have prepared for a long time to control international energy networks is going to fail. Yesterday, Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of the Russian Federation, accused the Trump administration of attempting to usurp influence over the global energy markets. Exactly what I was saying. The United States has adopted a series of doctrinal documents, one of which proclaims that the US must dominate global energy markets, so their goal is entirely clear. They want to bring every significant energy supply route under their control. But this was obvious long before the war with Iran started. This plan became operational when the Americans blew up the Russian Nord Stream pipeline and therefore left Germany without an important energy supply. It was obvious from that time that the Americans are intending to get their hands and control all global energy markets in order to preserve their position as a superpower. This is why later they kidnapped President Maduro and took control over Venezuela. Everything was and still is about energy markets and about how to control them, because if the Americans are going to control global energy markets, they can also squeeze the Chinese and prevent their development. The problem with this plan is that it was executed poorly, and especially because now in Washington we have an imbecile as president. Of course, this is not Trump's creation. He's not so intelligent to create a complex plan of how the Americans are going to control global energy markets. No, he's not capable to even think about such a complex scheme. It was thought out well by many American think tanks. It was prepared and made operational by the CIA, and it started a long time ago. This is a plan that the Americans have since the fall of the Soviet Union. It started with the first Gulf War, then it continued with the invasion of Iraq in 2003. Later they took measures to disconnect Europe from Russia in order to make the Europeans dependent on American energy. Now they created this complete chaos in the Middle East, one for Israeli interests to destroy Iran, and secondly to create a special situation that would limit the flow of oil through the Strait of Hormuz and to put the Chinese in trouble. And because we are talking about the Chinese, let's also discuss Donald Trump's visit to China. Donald Trump was welcomed in Beijing on Tuesday by Chinese Vice President Han Zheng rather than Chinese President Xi Jinping after arriving in China for a major diplomatic visit. While China still provided Trump with a formal state-style reception, military honors, and scheduled high-level talks, Xi's absence from the airport drew attention amid ongoing discussions between Washington and Beijing. In contrast, Xi Jinping personally hosted former Iranian President Ebrahim Raisi during his 2023 state visit to China, where the two sides reaffirmed their strategic partnership and signed multiple cooperation agreements. Yeah, if you want to put them in mirror, you will see striking differences and how the Chinese are treating, for example, the Russians or the Iranians and other allies, and how they are interacting with the Americans. The largest English language newspaper in China did not mention the US-China meeting on its front page, choosing instead to cover expanding ties with Tajikistan. This means that the Chinese relation with the Americans is cold, and we should not forget that Trump's visit was postponed a few times. During its meeting with Donald Trump, Chinese President Xi Jinping said, "The whole world is watching our meeting. Currently, transformation not seen in a century is accelerating across the globe, and the international situation is fluid and turbulent. The world has come to a new crossroads. Can we, in the interest of the well-being of our two peoples and the future of humanity, build a brighter future together for our bilateral relations? These are the questions vital to history, to the world, and to the people, said Chinese President Xi Jinping during its direct meeting with the American President Donald Trump. Does anyone believe that Donald Trump has the intellect to understand the complexity of the American and Chinese relations and the importance that China today, together with the United States, has over the present and the future of the planet? Does anyone seriously think that Donald Trump cares about the planet, about creating a brighter future for this planet, about global peace, about stability, about the fight against poverty, about international law, about the complex implications that AI has over the global economy? Of course he doesn't understand, and he neither cares about these topics. All that Trump wants is to make a little bit more money through some stock manipulation, by selling some weapons, by controlling and subjugating global energy markets, and so on. Everything in Trump's vision, it's about domination, American domination, and how the Americans can continue to be the sole superpower on this planet by preventing other countries from developing and become stronger. This is all that Trump and the Americans in general are thinking about. Although they are one of the biggest superpowers, they used to be the primary superpower on the planet, they never had the intelligence and the emotional maturity to understand the essential role that a superpower plays in the present and the future of humanity, and how their reckless actions are badly influencing the planet overall. On contrary, the Chinese have a more profound understanding of international relations and of the huge responsibility that comes when you become a superpower, and how your actions as a superpower, as a very rich, influential and powerful country, are influencing the planet. The Chinese have this understanding because they have a long history, a huge civilization, and they have a profound understanding of humanity and how humanity works. But don't expect this level of introspection. No, the Americans are just extreme manipulators, which are in the game just to make some extra money. If they can extort some country, they are going to do it. If they can invade it directly, of course they are going to do it, and then control its oil reserves. See the situation with Iraq, and so on. This is how Americans are thinking. And of course humanity needs a change. You cannot have a bully, a wannabe gangster like Trump and like the Americans controlling the planet, because this will lead to disaster. It's already leading us into a global economic disaster. What the planet needs is for the superpowers to be responsible and to have a profound understanding of humanity and how their actions are going to impact humanity. And a country with a short history like the United States is never going to be able to properly fit into this big role. Regardless if some people like it or not, always in history we had superpowers, we had empires, we had very influential nations, and so on. This is how history works. It will always be like this. But what we need is that those emerging superpowers understand things well and act in a manner that is beneficial to humanity overall. When you have a mentally unstable bully like the Americans, destroying everything in their path, taking actions that are crippling the economies of multiple countries without even thinking for a second and without even caring, then humanity overall has big problems. And this needs to be changed. And this is why we are in a strong need for the reformation of international organization, especially the United Nations. This type of organizations need to be reformed because they have failed. They are not working in the interests of the majority. For example, the Security Council of the United Nations is controlled by the countries with veto rights. If the Americans, or if Russia, for example, or even if China doesn't want something to happen, they can veto that. And we saw how this worked during the Gaza genocide, how the Americans were vetoing any type of United Nations resolution to stop the war against the Palestinians in Gaza. It also happens when it comes about Cuba, which, by the way, has completely run out of diesel and fuel due to the US blockade of the island. This is how things are currently, and there is a strong desire for change. The planet demands this type of change. The Americans and their Western vassals cannot be in control of the future of the planet for long. is not going to work. They need to accept this, and we need a multipolar world with different types of institutions which are going to function for the benefit of the many, not for the interests of a few. This is how things should be. Returning to China and the United States, watching Trump's visit is like watching a baboon in the Versailles. This is how Trump behaves during the visit. And I think we will see many awkward and somehow funny moments from this visit. The Chinese on the other side are pragmatic. They are business people. They want to buy and sell. They are not interested in invasions, in wars, in imposing sanctions, in regime change, and so on. They just want to have good economic relations with everyone in the world. And of course, for them, the United States is still an important market. So if they manage to have good relations with the United States, why not? It would be a win-win relation for everyone. But the smart people in Beijing are understanding that in Washington there is a clear ideology which doesn't change with a new administration. And that ideology is about how to disrupt and how to destroy your competitors. And this is what the Americans want in the end. They want the destruction of Russia as a state, the destruction of the Islamic Republic of Iran as a state, and if possible, also the destruction of the Chinese state. There is a big difference between what the Americans want and plan and what they achieve. We saw this during the war with Iran. They planned different types of operations to destroy Iran. All of them failed. They tried a few years ago to disrupt Chinese society when they started to support Uyghur extremists, and we had a wave of terrorist attacks inside China, which took place more or less in the same period with the beginning of the so-called civil war and revolution in Syria, and also in the same period with the color revolution in Ukraine. So the Americans are going to do what they know best: divide and conquer, sabotage, sanction, kill, assassinate, bomb, in order to prevent any type of emerging competitor. This is why the Chinese are very circumspect. They are going to trade with the Americans. It's impossible for the Chinese to stop trading with the Americans. The same way it's impossible for the Americans to stop trading with China. They can talk a lot. The Americans usually talk a lot, and they talk a lot of nonsense. But without Chinese market and without Chinese production, the United States would be in a big shithole. And they know this very well. So Trump can play his games, and he can make certain ridiculous statements which are believed only by some parts of his extremist MAGA base. But the reality is much more complex. This is all for today. If you like my content, please like, follow, share, and subscribe. And also, if you want me to touch on certain subjects, don't forget to write in the comments section of the Radical Thinker YouTube channel.